Welcome to the third in a series of 4 Day in the Life of Hospital Executives. This morning we have the pleasure of Margaret Irvine. She is the chairperson of the hospital, Butler Health Systems Hospital Board of Directors. And I'm glad to have you here, Margaret.
Thank you, glad to be here.
We're going to ask a series of questions, and the students, you will be having the opportunity to view this video, and at the end of the video, if you have any questions, you can pose them to me and I will pose them to Margaret to answer. So first of all, can you describe how you became the chairperson of Butler Health Systems Board of Directors?
Certainly. 5 years ago, I was president of Next Tier Bank, which is headquartered up in Butler County. And I've been very involved in other community nonprofits, one of which I've served with the gentleman who was the president of Slippery Rock University. He was on the hospital board in charge of governance, so I got a phone call one day. So boards typically, not just hospital boards, but most boards really like to have bankers on their boards, so that certainly helps. But my involvement in the community was also beneficial.
Are you an employee of the hospital?
No, I'm not an employee. It's a nonprofit hospital system. I am chair of the board, which is not a paid position.
Okay. Now, when you started on the board, were you a member of the board first and then became the chairperson, or did you step right into the chairperson position?
Yes, I was a member of the board for just 2 years, and I got the phone call to ask if I would be interested in becoming part of the succession plan for the current chair. He actually ended up having a conflict of interest because he was a consultant and received a received a contract with a healthcare provider, which put him in a position where he had to resign from our board. So only just 2 years after I was on the board, I became chair.
Can you give us a little bit about your background? What education-wise and
Sure.
how you became part of banking?
Certainly. I went to University of Maryland. I was a finance major there. And I grew up in a banking family, so after Maryland, I stayed in the DC area and worked for a few banks, and then I got the phone call to come home and work for our bank. Our family owned Next Tier Bank, and we sold it just a couple of years ago, but in the meantime, I came back and was working at the bank, and as I mentioned, very involved in our communities.
Besides being on the board, are you on other hospital committees?
Yes, as chair, I am a non-voting member for most of the committees, of which there are about 6. So I try to attend every single one of them, or at least conference call in to each of them on a regular basis.
You're busy with the hospital.
Yes.
Now, Butler is part of a health system. Can you describe how it became a health system as opposed to a hospital?
Certainly. It's actually an independent health system, meaning that we're not part of a larger health system that would typically come to mind in the Pittsburgh area. The hospital is one of the components of the health system. Other business lines under the health system umbrella, we have an ambulatory care service. We own physicians. They're in a separate corporation, and the foundation is also under that umbrella.
What is the health system's mission statement?
May I read it?
Yes.
Yes, the Butler Health System is privileged to be a healing presence in the communities we serve. We exist to make a positive difference in the lives of people by providing compassionate, high-quality care and comfort and inspiring health and well-being.
You know, we had the day in the life of Tom White, who was the Chief Executive Officer at Jameson Health System.
Right.
And, you know, one of the things that he mentioned was the CEO, as well as the board of the hospital and health system, being kind of the players for the community. That they have to always keep the community first in their mind and be a advocate for the community.
Correct.
And, you know, it sounds like the mission statement for Butler is the same, keeping a focus on the community.
Absolutely. The community most certainly stays involved in the hospital, and it's one of the largest employers of the region, so it's kind of a give and take that way.
Perfect. Now, what is the goals of your being the chairperson of the board and the board itself? What you feel is the goals that you have
As chair or as
as the chair and as the board?
So we, as the board, oversee the goals for the hospital, and they report up to us in the whole entire health system. Their accomplishments on a monthly basis. There's a fine line in between getting too involved in micromanaging as a board of any board, not just our board. So we try to walk that fine line. We challenge some of the initiatives that the staff may take to reach those goals. We challenge if they're the correct goals. And that goes back to our strategic planning process, which I'm sure we'll touch on. But so our main role as a board is oversight of what goals that we've and objectives that we've set for the hospital and their staff.
What's your involvement with the CEO of the hospital, health system?
So our board meets every other month. He and I have planned meetings on a regular basis, but we also have ad hoc phone calls throughout the in between different meetings. So he and I meet at least one time between our board meetings, but then we talk on a regular basis, and I'm involved in other meetings when necessary.
And essentially, you and the board are his boss. You are the ones that will determine his reviews and evaluations, correct?
Correct. There's a compensation committee that oversees that process. But as with any board, the CEO reports to the board, which I imagine at times is sometimes frustrating, not only, again, for healthcare, but for other industries when you might not have industry experts on the board. And so trying to make sure that the board is as educated as possible about the strategic initiatives or the future of that industry is very key for a key role of the CEOs.
It sounds like you and the CEO work together to produce an agenda for the meeting.
Correct.
How do you ensure a productive meeting? And how do you get that information out to your board? Do you get it out prior to the meeting in electronic or books? Or?
Yes, good question. We've switched up the agenda to some extent. So when I got on the board a couple of years prior to becoming chair, I felt like there was a lot of time going through committee reports, staff updates, not really hitting on the strategic initiatives of the hospital. So we switched it up to have a consent agenda so that there are a lot of items that would have otherwise been reviewed in the meeting itself that we ask everyone to take extra time in advance in preparation for the meetings to read through. If there's any question of any of the items that are on the agenda, we can pull it out of the consent agenda and review it, but otherwise that has opened up a tremendous amount of time in the meetings so we can focus much more on strategic initiatives and quality or anything else that's going on that we need to be involved in.
That's probably allowed for more exchange by the members as far as what discussions as opposed to dog and pony shows and things
Yeah,
like that.
I'm very impressed. First of all, I want the staff to be able to present something, so we become familiar with the staff and understand the team that the CEO is working on. That's very critical for his success to have a strong team behind him, so I do want them to be involved to some extent. But it's also very critical, and we're lucky that we have a very involved board, I should say engaged board, because they do their homework. They do read in advance. They ask great questions, and some of the very small items that are in the packets, they pick up. So it's good.
I think since like a lot of trouble that Enron had with their board of directors, and I think boards used to be more of a rubber stamp, and now I see that the boards are very engaged and they understand their roles as officers of the hospital.
Ideally, that's the case, and it is the case with ours. We've been very diligent about getting the right players on the board. We actually have a matrix developed that the gentleman in charge of the governance committee really drove through and spent a tremendous amount of time on. So we make sure that we've got the skill sets, the expertise, the community and involved people. So we have the attorneys, the CPAs, the healthcare experts. I mean, we have a fantastic matrix of capabilities on our board.
How many members do you have on the board?
It varies. Our bylaws create a requirement to have so many physicians for every other independent board member. So right now we're between 10 and 13.
Okay. And How do you, whenever you do select a new board member, how do you orient them to the board?
We actually have an orientation, but that's even before then. We have a pipeline of trustees that we want to start presenting. So we have term limits. Not many boards do, and I think it's a fantastic idea to have term limits on the board. Ours in particular is 3 4-year terms. This year, at the end of 15, we have 3 board members rolling off that have served their time. So we are in the process now of interviewing other trustees already. I might bring some on to be on different committees to get them more acclimated to the hospital, because it takes an awful lot of time to create understanding of the financial aspects of a hospital, let alone the importance of the regulatory environment, how hospitals are even paid, or maybe more so not paid. And so to get that education accomplished in advance of even becoming a trustee is one of our goals. So we've, so like I said, we have a pipeline of, based on that matrix, what skill sets we need to complement the remainder of our board once these 3 cycle off. So it's behind the scenes an awful lot of work.
Do you have an age limit too, or just a year limit?
We do not. It's just an age limit.
So they're on for a total of 12 years they could be on the board, correct? Have you, as far as your board, you know, I'm sure finance is a big part of your board meeting. Have you seen a change as far as the focus on finance as well as patient safety? Have you seen the percentage of time that's spent on quality and patient safety has increased over the last years?
Since I've been on, they've been critical. The regulation that the hospitals or the healthcare industry have been under have been very similar to what I experienced in the banking world, that we both got hit with a ton of regulation. So we've all been ramping up to understand how we respond to all of that regulation. Our committees have taken on a lot more work as it relates to those changes, and those changes include different types of measurements, different kinds of payment process or systems how we'll get reimbursed. So the committee has taken on the more significant aspects of those, but the reporting at the board has most definitely picked up, and the interest level of the board members in those items, the quality, the patient safety, the finance, and how we measure or create a baseline for improvement.
Right, your
Have been very
metrics and
benchmarking, yes.
So you have to have money to have a successful hospital, and you have to have a high quality hospital to be successful, so they kind of go hand in hand.
Those are in conflict sometimes, aren't they?
They are. As far as talking about finance, are you part of the finance committee at the hospital?
I am involved in the finance. I'm not a voting member, but I'm involved in all of those meetings.
So, you know, the budget process, I'm sure, is happening about now, and you're on a fiscal year of July through June?
Yes.
So how does the board get involved in budgets, and how do they, you know, as far as the senior team will be coming to you with a budget that they want to spend so much money on capital, and they're going to be spending so much on other things. So what's the process by which the board approves a budget that's prepared by the senior team?
The senior team will take it through the finance committee, and they'll have several meetings. So you're right, this is the time of year that we're starting to look at the next fiscal year. So they'll have many meetings on the off time between our board meetings to review the budget in great detail, to go over the line items of change as a result of the regulatory environment, and some more of those items kicking in over time. The Finance Committee will present that via our CFO, but in the board meeting. Our board has, as I mentioned, really transitioned a lot of the behind-the-scenes responsibilities to its committees because of the strength of those committees. We have fantastic financial expertise on that committee, and we trust but verify at the board for the committee's work. So everybody has the opportunity to review the budget in advance, compare it to prior years, what's changed, what we expect both the negative and the positive impact on the budget year over year is, but the heavy lifting is done at the committee level.
I like the saying trust but verify, and definitely building teams that you can trust That was a saying whenever I was in the senior team at St. Clair, was, you have to trust, but you have to verify it too, because,
Absolutely.
people make mistakes, and so it's not something that you're rubber stamping.
Exactly. Don't assume that someone else has reviewed it in great detail. Review it yourself, because you are a board member, and that's your responsibility.
Now, you had mentioned in the beginning about conflict of interest, and
Yes.
I know on an annual basis, the board would be sent out a conflict of interest statement. Can you just explain what a conflict of interest is for the students?
Yes, it's if you have any contact, any role in your either professional world or other nonprofit boards that you're on that may be in conflict with the hospital or the health system in total. Some of those might include any of their more significant vendors. You have to disclose if you're a percentage of ownership greater than some amount, very small amount. Yeah, it's certainly definitely a minority percentage of any of those vendors. If you in your professional life might also do business with those vendors, so perhaps those vendors could influence you. As an example, I disclosed on my conflict of interest statement when I joined the hospital board that I had a conflict being the president of the bank because the hospital banked with us. So I was not permitted to be on certain committees when I joined the board. And even when I became chair, interestingly, I could not be on the compensation committee because I would influence according to the conflict of interest statement, I had the potential to influence the CEO's pay, who also banked with us. So I wasn't even permitted as chair of the board to be part of the compensation committee. Now since then I've switched jobs, and so I'm actually able to have one more committee on my list.
It's like if the hospital has someone from construction on the board and they're aware of any projects that are anticipated by the board, that they might have an unfair advantage to knowing what you're looking to pay,
Correct.
that they're able to do some under the table type of dealings that would not be fair.
That's exactly right. Or get involved in a bid process before the rest of the potential construction companies even had an opportunity to start on it.
Right.
That have insider information.
Right.
Nobody wants those words on your
No.
list.
Switching to strategic planning.
Yes.
Butler had gone through a major strategic planning with building a new facility.
Yes.
And can you explain some of that strategic planning process and maybe a little bit about, that was a major project that you underwent.
The tower? I wasn't on the board when the tower was built, and I'm referring to a new addition to the hospital several years ago. I don't know, maybe even 9 years ago by now. The hospital had planned on finding new property to build a whole new hospital on, and stay in, of course, Butler County somewhere. But at the end of the day, it ended up making more sense to build a tower, a very new technology type tower, and great patient care.
I've heard it's been very good.
Really wonderful. Right on the same campus where we are now, so it was a great idea. Now we're also at this point building a new facility to offer more services to a broader extent to the communities that we serve, just right down the hill from our current hospital site. So the process of going through that also goes through finance, goes through quality care, goes through many of the different committees to make sure that we're, it's well vetted and we're doing the right thing for the community and the hospital, and then it goes to the board. And we've gotten outside consultants to get extra opinions. I mean, it's a tremendous amount of time and effort to go into getting that final stamp of approval.
Now, do you survey community members as far as what they're looking for the hospital? Do you get input from the community?
Not so much do you like this or do you like that. What the surveys we look at are population health. So what are the needs of the community? What are the highest levels of disease rates, I'll say? Is it heart disease? Is it women's health care? So there's a very interesting report that measures the difference between what our community is experiencing as it relates to health needs and how many doctors and physicians are in the market to serve those needs. So that assists us with not only our physician hiring, or at least contracting, but also are we serving those needs of the community? So it's not more. It's more of a it's more of a science of looking at the healthcare needs
Not a
in the
satisfaction.
community. Correct.
Now, how do you determine what direction the hospital goes in the future? Do you have a crystal ball that you and the CEO
Yes,
look
in
at?
fact, I brought it with me. It's a piece of cake to understand what's going on in the healthcare industry. I wish that were the case. We'd all like to think that we have control of our own destiny. We all know that that is not true. So we have intentions. We have strong strategic plans. We know exactly where we want to be financially, what business lines we need to be in to make sure we are in fact serving the community. We have a 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, and we're even looking at doing a longer term potential impact to the healthcare. Every year something takes us a little bit off track, whether it's the regulatory environment, whether it's change in the payment reimbursement system. I mean, something always puts a little nick in our plans, but that's the same with every industry.
Mm-hmm.
You're just ready for those side trips.
Change is the only thing certain.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Now, with any hospital, qualified physicians are your lifeline, and so how do you attract qualified physicians and retain them?
It's a great question. So physicians become obviously the lifeline of the health of a hospital system. They're not always employees. In fact, very rarely. I mean, it's a very small percentage of your physicians that actually are employees. So you have to contract with those in the market to make sure that they have access to the hospital, because they also drive your brand. So it's a very intricate relationship that you have with your physicians. You have to have a level of respect, mutual respect. You have to make sure that they have the tools necessary to do their jobs. They usually are the ones that raise their hands and say, I have a physician that you need to talk to, whether it's to acquire their practice, which is happening like crazy now, or to just bring them into the hospital to be a contracted physician.
So you're seeing an increase in the number of physicians that are looking to be employed by the hospital?
Yes, and we're also seeing a tremendous amount of activity by the other larger systems in the market of acquiring those physicians' practices.
Yeah.
So they're becoming far and few between to still find independent physicians.
I think with the reimbursement changes, physicians are looking for security.
Correct.
And security in the hospital. Now, Butler's been able to maintain its independence.
Yes.
They are becoming one of few, as was St. Clair,
Yeah.
as the one of few independent hospitals. And I know Jefferson just going with Allegheny Health Network. There's less number of independents. You see Butler being able to maintain its independence?
We hope so. I mean, that's our plan, is we want to be an independent hospital to maintain, community services. So you can go to Butler Health System to have so many more of your heart services than having to go into Pittsburgh, or your cancer care instead of having to take a long drive into town. So we find a tremendous advantage of staying independent for our communities. We have been successful in that so far, and that is definitely our intention. As many are. I mean, some can't make it work.
Right. And Butler doesn't have a lot of competition. They do have Cranberry, but a lot like in Pittsburgh, where there's someone right at their doorstep.
Correct. Yeah, the closer you are to Pittsburgh, the more difficult it is.
Yeah. Now, with Butler being a nonprofit hospital, it's an obligation that the hospital gives back to the community. Any thoughts on how Butler does that for the community?
Well, a lot of that happens to us, meaning that we give care to our community whether they have the insurance or not. So of all of those independent hospitals, we do a little bit of benchmarking amongst ourselves to see how we're doing on many different measurements. One of them is the non-pay patients that come in. We actually have the highest number of patients coming into our hospital that do not have any access to insurance. So it becomes a higher number not to crack, basically. And we have to find ways to compensate for that free care that we're giving.
You're saying compared to other hospitals in the Western
The
Pennsylvania?
independent hospitals in the market.
Now, being a nonprofit, just had some discussion in one of the classes talking about, you know, tax exempt and, you know, giving back to the community and making sure that you're giving back enough that, you know, based on the community. Having uninsured patients with the Affordable Care Act, do you anticipate there'll be a decrease in the number of uninsured because it's now becoming mandated?
A requirement. Well, this is my independent thought as opposed to being chair. I'm concerned that it'll almost have the opposite effect, that it'll actually increase the number of uninsured, because at this point, corporations can pay not to provide insurance. The fine that they receive for not offering insurance to their employees is actually less sometimes than the insurance itself.
Yeah.
So it could actually create a higher need of insurance from the communities.
Yeah, that's, you know, and also an individual, the penalty is less than what it would cost them
Exactly.
to have insurance too. So, now, we've talked a little bit about the selection process of the board. You know, what type of traits are you looking in a board member?
I'm going to sneeze. I'm going to try not to sneeze. Now that I said it out loud, I won't have to. Sorry. The traits that we're looking for are, you know, it's a matrix that we've developed on the skill sets. So it's what is your expertise? What is your line of business that you come from? Again, we want to have attorneys on the board. We want to have CPAs on the board. Anyone with some kind of other finance background. We want those involved in the community. We really want disciples out in the community spreading the good word every once in a while, or finding other board members for us to create that pipeline that we have. We want those that are in the C-suite of large employers in the community, so that they understand and can bring our message back also to their employee base. Those people that are very involved in their communities, as much healthcare knowledge as possible, but that's the one that's difficult to find, somebody that isn't conflicted out with a healthcare. There's a real fine line there. And of course, we have physicians on our board as well that represent all of the other physicians that use our facilities.
Now, does the board member need to reside in Butler County?
No.
So they can be outside of the county too?
In the areas that we serve, which we have other facilities that are much, well, we are actually in many contiguous counties to Butler County.
Try to spread the market area.
Correct.
Now, education for the board. What type of education do you provide to the board?
I've been a huge proponent since I've become chair. So we've set a half an hour aside in advance of every single board meeting to cover something, whether it's to do a deeper dive, as an example, into our budget. So we don't take a half an hour out of the whole board meeting. And they're not mandatory, but just about all of the board members do show up. There are other, we have a list of the type of training that we ask the board members, what do they need, what do they want, all of the, you know, the hot items that are going on in healthcare, we make sure we set aside time for in advance of the board meetings. Along with that, we send our board members on there is so much education that's offered by the associations that service the healthcare industry, so they go to retreats on an annual basis and hear a lot. And the last time I went, as an example, I came back with pages. I wonder sometimes, does the staff really want us to go to these? Because I talked to the CEO, our general counsel, our COO, our CFO. I mean, I was shooting questions out everywhere of things that I heard at this conference. So it's a mixed blessing, I'm sure, for them.
Education's important because you only know what you know. And if you don't go outside of that area, you won't know what's out there.
Exactly. So. Now, the staff comes to the retreats with us, so they're hearing it at the same time. So we all huddle at lunch or whatever and talk through what we just heard.
Yeah.
So it's
Being
good.
in academia, I know how important education is.
Absolutely.
Now, what would you say is the most rewarding part of being the chairperson?
That's a good question. I have been fascinated by the healthcare industry, and as I mentioned, the similarities and the parallels with the financial industry. So, as I mentioned, both industries got really bombarded with regulation for one reason or another. What I think is happening in the financial industry is it's going to create ongoing and maybe even enhanced merger and acquisition activity, because the burden of carrying that regulatory expense is going to drive a lot of smaller banks out of business. In the healthcare scenario, you have to recreate yourself, you have to understand what's coming down the pike as much as possible in advance and react to it. But also, I think it's creating opportunities to do a better job of what do you need to do, what do you have to do in your industry, what can you collaborate with without and still stay independent. So there are a lot of meetings that I have with the CEO about what is it that we can maybe outsource and create another corporation with others in the same situation that we are, that's not going to make a difference. It doesn't have any impact on confidentiality or HIPAA rules or anything else, but it takes that overhead off of our backs, basically, and puts it into a center where we all can share in the expense, or frankly, sometimes share in that income.
Yeah.
So it's being quick on your feet in healthcare. So I've been fascinated by learning something at every single meeting, at every single magazine I get, on the healthcare, and it's changing so rapidly. It's hard to stay up with.
That's, it's what is today could be different this afternoon.
Yeah, what time is it?
Yeah, it's like
what happened?
I know coming into work, it was like, I thought I knew what I was going to do the day, but sometimes it could be derailed by something that the government sent out, something happened.
Something within our own backyard,
right.
Because there's a lot of activity in the healthcare world right in this region.
What would be the hardest obstacle that you've had to deal with being a chairperson or being a member of the board?
Well, we've had a pretty good run at it since I've been on the board, as far as our financial performance, our safety numbers, our quality numbers. We've formed some great partnerships, one with Highmark, one with UPMC, on providing that care locally with our physicians via those organizations. So the challenge is understanding that you have a bucket of capital expenditure, funds, and it's limited, and you don't.
It's not an endless bucket.
No, you don't have just some money tree or unlimited check writing capability. So where do you spend those dollars in the most strategic way? I mean, is it acquiring those physicians' practices? Is it spending more on technology, which is very easy to overspend on technology? Is it getting prepared for some of the more comprehensive regulatory requirements like the electronic reporting? I mean, there's so many things that you have to really be very diligent with those dollars. So that's the challenge, I think, that not only our board but every board has in the healthcare industry right now is you have a bucket of funds, and how do you spend it most appropriately for the
Everybody
future?
wants you to spend it on their department.
Of
Or a
course.
physician wants you to buy another Da Vinci, or they want to buy something else. So
Exactly.
So your job is to make sure that everybody's treated fairly and that you're looking at it, the big picture.
And ideally, when you do spend something out of that bucket, because of course things come up through the year that you didn't necessarily budget for in every industry, again, not just our hospital. But so when does that become accretive? I mean, what does that look like? Is there an ROI on those funds? Is it an expense that we just have to incur to meet the regulatory requirements? So there's a whole lot of questioning around that expenditure coming from the board, probably through finance that they've already vetted it.
Yeah, it's just like a home budget, that contingency
Exactly.
that you got to, if your car breaks down, you got to get it fixed. You weren't
Probably didn't plan on it.
But we touched upon the quality metrics. Is there a scorecard that you look at to determine, to get a pulse check of what you're doing within the organization, how the hospital's doing on certain things?
Yeah, so the committees themselves go into more detail. We have several scorecards, probably on just about every single committee. I say that. But it's very, it's a telling snapshot for our board, who might, they're not all involved in the other committees like I am, but it tells them, Green, you're doing what you said you were going to do, and you're on budget, you're on time, you're on track, whatever the green light is. Yellow is, if we keep this pace up, we just might not get there, and of course the red is where you focus.
Mm-hmm.
So, there are finance metrics, there are quality metrics, safety metrics, meeting the requirements of all the regulations. I mean, so there's a tremendous amount of measurements that, again, are managed mostly at the committee levels and vetted for hours in those meetings, that then they get to the board and we still spend some time on them, but not as much.
You're dealing with a group of people. Do you ever have conflict amongst the members? And how do you
Absolutely.
resolve that?
And, conflict is not always a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
So we have some board members that are very risk adverse. We have others that say we have to forge ahead and get going on this item. And it becomes a very healthy balance. Because if you had everybody sitting in the room who actually agreed with each other, that's dangerous. I mean, you can't let, you can't just be that rubber stamp. You have to challenge some of the decisions and understand that, because if they come back, it's not just the CEO's back, it's the board. So
That's
we
definitely-
make sure that part of that matrix is, how is this person wired? Is the person, again, more risk adverse, that they'll actually ask the questions that need to be asked about what are the downsides of making these decisions. We have to have those that almost become an uncomfortable position about pushing us towards doing more in healthcare, like some of the for-profit systems are doing. So that healthy balance does create conflict, does create awkward situations and conversations, but at the end of the day, we all should walk out of those board meetings and realize that, the decision that we landed on was the right decision and well vetted.
That's true. Now, do you see yourself as an ambassador or an advocate for the community? And do you think the board members also see that as their role as being an advocate or an ambassador?
Absolutely. We call ourselves, kind of disciples or ambassadors, that people know that we're on the board of the hospital. It's, because of our brand per se and our image in the community, people want to be on our board. So they ask us about the hospital and its performance and what we have going on. We try to be very active with our PR and make sure that we are, in fact, kind of shouting from the rooftops about some of our, latest and greatest, either acquisitions for the physicians or acquisitions of equipment that we have, or our capabilities or our quality measurements. I mean, there are a lot of things that we have to be very proud of. So if the paper doesn't pick it up, then that becomes our responsibility.
That's right. That's right. What better advocate than the people that are serving the board? Now, as far as your role as a chairperson, how long of a position is that for you?
There are, so if our normal board members' roles are 3 4-year terms, so 12 years. As chair, I have 2 2-year terms as a possibility.
So you're in the second?
I just got on the second, yes.
So in 2 years, you'll be, is there, as far as the succession plan
Yes.
is there a vice chair of the board?
We have the ability to have a vice chair in our bylaws. We have not had a vice chair. But what I'm actually in the process of doing now before our next board meeting is making phone calls and reaching out to each of our board members and asking them to participate on committees. Again, building that matrix and understanding the balance that needs to occur on each of the committees with not only that risk adversity versus, entrepreneurial type outlook, but also the skill sets. I've asked people to shake it up a little bit on the committees. That creates not only more educated board members, but it does create a better succession plan for that next chair or the next chair of any of the committees, in fact.
Succession planning is probably one of the things that organizations don't put enough attention to, that even with the CEOs or the senior team, because, you think you're going to be there forever.
Agreed.
And it's time to move on, and that knowledge that's so important to pass on.
Correct, absolutely. So that when I was approached to see if I wanted to be in the succession pipeline for the chair position, they asked me to participate on a couple of committees that are really where the meat of the matter is, and that is the quality and professional. And that's where we go over the safety, where we go over all the scorecard of how the hospital is performing to its healthcare standards, but also finance. You have to understand how the hospital is getting paid, or again, maybe not getting paid,
Right.
and understand how to compensate for those that are not insured. So I started on those committees, and then the conflict issue came up. So I definitely became chair before anybody anticipated. But that's why you have a succession plan, because you can't, there's no crystal ball for that either.
Right. You mentioned the bylaws. The bylaws is what the hospital runs their organization by?
Yes, there are bylaws that have been, kind of behind the scenes, become part of the governance of how every organization works. Every organization should have bylaws, but it dictates the composition of the boards. It dictates the succession plan for the CEO, if something should happen to the CEO, who becomes the next in line. It talks about how many meetings we need to have, what different committees, what the structure is, the number of people who have to be on each committee. I mean, it definitely becomes the backbone of how our governance works.
It's very black and white, too.
Yes.
And I'm sure bylaws are reviewed on an
Annual basis.
And attorneys get involved to make sure that the wordings are correct. And
Exactly.
so, finally, we've got these students that are healthcare administration students, and what advice would you give them as they continue their career and they're hoping to get into a hospital position somewhere? And I've encouraged them, they need to be patient. They're not going to be a CEO tomorrow.
Correct.
But
Nor do they want to be. I think the best advice that I could give to any student who wants to become an administrator is don't be afraid to get your hands dirty, to start at the level. And as one of my friends always says, I will help you write your strategic plan, or I'll go out and get you coffee, because everything in between is going to be critical. The more you understand about what your staff has to do on a daily basis and respect them for it, the better you will be as you rise up to that C-suite. And I'm talking about not just your staff as it relates to other administrators, but more importantly, maybe the physicians. The more they have a respect and regard for you and what you do to run the hospital, the better the hospital will work. Most hospitals have unions for the physicians, for the nurses, and if those unions feel like you as an administrator understand what they go through and what their daily lives look like, the more successful you'll be. So some of the best staff members that I have seen are ones that maybe even went to medical school for some time to understand what physicians have to go through, and a strong appreciation and respect for the physicians.
And I think too, it's a teamwork that every person, it's almost like a puzzle coming together, and everybody has their strengths enough to understand what their role is.
The interesting thing about hospitals and the revenue that's generated from hospitals is they're not from your employees. They could be contracted physicians, or just those physicians that have access to your facilities that are driving your revenue stream that could be gone tomorrow. So, again, to have that healthy respect and appreciation that is a two-way street is very critical for success.
Perfect. Any final comments?
Well, it is a very rewarding the healthcare industry is one that is changing on a regular basis, and it's rewarding and exciting to be part of it. And I've in fact encouraged my own son to go into the healthcare industry as administration, because it is so dynamic, and I'm anticipating a great need for, fresh ideas and understanding coming from students these days. So I wish everybody luck, and I think it's a great field you're entering, and hopefully I'll see you on the other side.
And it's definitely one that is a vast amount of opportunities out there. Just
Absolutely.
having the patience
Growing.
to wait for that position.
Correct.
But, well, students, if there's any questions that you have, please let me know. There'll be an assignment based on this interview, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts. We will have another day in the life of coming up with the CFO of a hospital. So thank you very much, and I want to thank you very much, Margaret,
Thank
for
you.
giving us the opportunity to hear what's going on with you in Butler and the chairperson. Thank you.
I enjoyed it. Thanks.